So to start our stretch and fold technique, we're going to put all of our dry ingredients into our greased container. The grease just makes it a little bit easier, or makes us a little bit more certain that things don't stick. So I have my two flours, my whole wheat and my plain flour, my salt. Into that I'm going to add my sourdough, and then once my sourdough is added, I'm going to start adding my water. My water is variable. My water is going to vary depending on how wet my sourdough is, depending on what types of flours I'm using. I'm going to need more or less water. So I'm going to add kind of 80% of my water to start with, and then from there I can move on, and if I feel like my dough is a little dry, I can then add more water after that. I then just take my hand and kind of like a paddle, start to mix everything together. My end goal here isn't so much to develop any gluten in my dough, or to like go and knead my bread all that much. All I really want is that basically all of my flour gets hydrated. Okay, so I'm looking for something that doesn't really have many dry spots in there. Will it look rough and shaggy? It absolutely will, but it doesn't need to necessarily be smooth for this technique. So I added a little bit more water to make it a little bit more pliable and to incorporate my flour a little bit better, and just kept mixing in an effort to bring everything together much better. Once I get to the point that my dough is, or my flour is all covered in my water, it's going to be a very simple case of leaving my dough to one side, and I rest my dough for 25 minutes at a time. So I come back and I do this, or I do my stretch and fold technique 4 times after I have done this initial mixing. And each of those 4 times, my water will have hydrated my dough a little bit better, and I'll end up with something that passes my Windowpane test without me having to do much work to my dough at all. The stretch and fold technique is a technique to develop the gluten in bread dough by allowing a high hydration or a high level of water in my dough to naturally align the gluten structure in my dough. It takes 4 to 5 turns for my dough to become well developed. My hands, and you can see in the 25 minutes that I've left my dough rest that it's already becoming much stretchier than it was, and much more of a homogeneous dough than it was when I left it the last time. So basically I pick up the 4 sides of my dough and just lay them over each other. The idea behind this dough is to make something with an open crumb structure, so lots of big air bubbles in the dough. And by doing this, folding it over itself, I'm basically trapping layers of air into my dough that when I then shape them and bake them, they will turn into air pockets in the bread and give me a big open air pocket in the bread, which gives me my open crumb structure. Once I'm done with my stretches, I just leave my dough to one side, 25 minutes more. And my dough each time will become progressively more stretchy and progressively more homogeneous. By the end of this process, I should end up with a perfectly smooth dough that passes my Windowpane test. So you can see the second time it's already becoming very homogeneous. Already I'm getting great stretch in my dough and being able to fold it over quite easily on itself, which is a great sign that my hydration is good and that my dough is going to come out nice and manageable and smooth when I'm ready for baking. So for the next part, again, water my hands, and you can see I'm almost passing my Windowpane test on my 3rd go around, which is great. Good sign that I'll probably need 4 goes around to make this perfect. and again, folding it over itself, creating air pockets, and those air pockets are creating a nice aerated dough in which I will get nice big open crumb structure. So I saw last time round that my dough was almost passing my Windowpane test. So this time I'm just going to stretch out my dough and make sure that before I do anything, if it passes my Windowpane test, it's ready to go into the fridge. So I'm just going to take an edge of my dough, stretch it out, and try and pass the Windowpane test, by which my dough should stretch enough that I can see my fingers through the dough. So to pass the Windowpane test, I'm just going to take a part of my dough. I'm going to begin to stretch it upwards and outwards. And if I can see my fingers through my dough without my dough ripping, that's a good sign that my gluten is well developed. So what I'm going to do is take my dough, roll that into something of a smooth ball, and then leave my dough to one side. Then I'm going to take a greased container and leave my dough to cold proof overnight in the fridge. This will take anything between kind of 12 to 18 hours, no problem at all. So the reason I've used a greased container is to make sure that as my dough is rising, there's no friction caused between the plastic of the container and my dough, so that my dough can rise evenly without any obstruction from the plastic, and it's not sticking to the plastic. So now I just cover my dough and I will come back to it and see you guys in maybe 12 hours. So once my dough is nice and cold, it's going to be super manageable. So I'm going to take off the lid, have a look, view the large air bubble that has formed on the top of my dough overnight, and you can see my dough is nice and sticky, and it has also proved quite dramatically and quite large, or grown quite large. Around the outside of my container, the grease has helped as well, so that my dough hasn't stuck to the inside of the container. So as I try to take it out onto the table, it should just come out in one piece with very little sticking to the container. And now I need to be super gentle. I'm being super gentle to basically deflate my dough as little as possible. So I'm just going to gently divide my dough into 3 pieces, 2 of which are going to make kind of long loaf shapes, and 1 of which is going to make a round kind of bowl shape in my dough. I have 2 loaf tins that are dusted liberally with some rice flour, and in order to make my shape, I'm going to flatten out my dough somewhat into a rectangle, and then again I'm going to basically fold it over in itself so that I'm trapping yet more air in the dough, and I'm doing as little handling as possible before I get that guy into the loaf tin. I fold up the ends just to make it something kind of more rectangular, and seal it by pressing in underneath my dough to give me my shape for the tin. Meanwhile, for my round shape, I'm just going to gently fold the edges of my dough underneath the ball to give me a nice smooth surface on the top of my dough. Once I then bring that down to the table, I'm going to use my 2 hands and get my my baby fingers in underneath the dough, so that I'm kind of folding the sides underneath the dough to get it nice and sealed off at the bottom. I'm then going to flip the dough over and just gently fold it together to give myself something like a dough package before I roll it back over onto the table. So I've put my loaves in my loaf tins with the rice flour. Meanwhile, for my circular dough, I'm going to dust the bowl with rice flour, and also dust the top of the dough ball with rice flour, just to make sure that it's very unlikely to stick. I'm then going to prove my loaves at room temperature for kind of 3 to 3.5 hours until they've grown to fill the mold, or filled their molds completely. I'm then going to cross my dough over itself a little bit. This has 2 effects. One, it kind of gives you a good seal on the bottom of your dough. And the other thing that it does is it helps to unstick the dough from the towel. Because sometimes dough gets a little sticky and can stick to the towel. Bit of a spoiler, this may happen shortly. So, next thing I do is flip over my dough. Okay, take off my tins, and then gently, with as shallow an angle as possible, take the cloth off the towels, or off the loaves, I should say. If it gets a little bit sticky, that's no problem. Remember, the idea here is not professional bread. The idea here is to make a bread using this method, and to have a bread that is edible. Because at the end of the day, when we're making bread at home, what do we want our bread to be? Edible. Does it matter how it looks? Not so much. Once my doughs are ready to go, I'm going to dust the top of my breads with some flour, and I'm going to take my lamb at a really shallow angle and cut quickly down my dough in order to open them up, and basically give the dough some weakness and somewhere where it can open up in the oven. Similarly, for the round loaf, I'm going to basically take the sides of the dough, fold them over the middle, again in an effort to help it unstick from the bowl. And once I have that done all the way around, I'm going to flip over my bowl, and I'm going to allow it to unstick gently before again scoring. You'll see on the tray, or on the peel for the oven, I have some cornmeal. The cornmeal basically gives me a layer between the dough and the board, so that the dough won't stick to the board before I put it in the oven. Again, dust with some flour, take my trusty lamb, and a quick shallow angle and a quick cut to open up that dough. Okay, if it looks like it hasn't opened at one end, I can always come back, cut the other way, but you should never double cut your dough. And once that's ready to go, it goes into the oven. Thanks for watching the video, folks. If you like what you saw, please give me a like and a subscribe, share the video with your friends, and remember to check back often because I'll be posting videos regularly on my site. In the meantime, happy baking!